and technical philosophy exist, but it was really difficult to find a problem to really solve, right? So many people argue that it's a solution that's looking for problem. But here we are, we actually have a global crisis in front of us, and which Web3 can really, Web3, tech stack and approaches can really help to solve the problem.
Hey everybody, I'm Mahan from Tech Circus, back again with another interview ahead of the Web3 conference. I'm sitting down today with Jennifer Zhu Scott, the executive chairman of the Commons Project. So welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, Mahan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on board. I appreciate you making time. So, just in order, I suppose, could you tell me a bit about the Commons Project? I find it really interesting, the kind of common good digital platforms. Seems to be very current, very relevant to today. So I'm interested to learn a bit more.
Yeah, man, people say everything in life is about timing. The Commons Project was actually established before the COVID, and with a goal to basically aim to build digital infrastructure and digital service that does not have any shareholders or any VC investors. Therefore, individuals' data and benefit will be protected, and certain kind of digital infrastructure could be regarded as public good. Completely had no idea there will be a global pandemic in front of us. So initially, the Commons Project was really, working on bringing data interoperability in the U.S. because U.S. have hundreds of healthcare providers, but patients not only, don't have data interoperability when you switch from one healthcare provider to the next. Often they don't even have access to their patient data. So when COVID happened, we realized, hang on a second, the reason why the border have to shut down, even every country has, especially now, tests and vaccine, and still the border has to shut down. It's really because there's no data interoperability. So since COVID, we started to finding different angle to build digital, solutions for governments, for individuals, for healthcare providers, in order to putting something in place and not only just safely reopen the border, but also some infrastructure that could be in place for long term. That's not built by big tech, and it's not built by governments either.
Yep. That's a really interesting observation, because that was kind of a big part of the issue as well, isn't it? It's like, who kind of owns the data, who's in control of it? Is it one specific government if it's a global issue? I mean, should it be the US? Should it be somebody else? Or private companies, what level of, collusion, or is that, is it ethical for private companies to be in ownership? So that's a fascinating kind of intermediary between the two of them. And how did you find, I suppose you said the pandemic was kind of a surprise and came along, but did that develop any kind of things then with the Common Project, like any specific use cases, I suppose, that came about because of the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I think the pandemic, we say you never waste a crisis, right? The pandemic, of course, has been absolutely terrible, but the opportunity here is also now people actually have to carry their COVID-related health data across the border, go to different, systems. So what we have been doing, we've been doing quite a few different things, which I will share more during the conference. But to give you one of the examples, we co-developed a data standard called Smart Health Card that has been adopted, not only just by Canadian government, Japanese government, multiple states in the U.S. and many healthcare providers. But also, this is where I think our governance model, which is nonprofit and neutral, and has very, very deep link to the philosophy of Web3, right? Because we're neutral, because we are open, and we're nonprofit. So we co-developed the data standard with Microsoft, but Apple adopted in last June for iOS 15, and Google also adopted for Android. Never happened in tech industry before.
That's fascinating. So yeah, as a non-profit, I suppose you can kind of straddle the lines between the two. And you mentioned the connection with Web3 because a lot of people that I've been speaking to about the kind of Web3 stuff, it's about the user owning their own data. You know, having a digital identity that travels across different kind of platforms, and you know the websites don't own your data. There's a kind of and you can monetize it, but mainly just that kind of sense of ownership of your own data. And is that something that's coming into play here, maybe?
Yeah, I think if anyone follow any of my work would know I have been talking about individual data ownership for many, many years, and before Web3 was a term. But the key here, I will be the first one to say the Commons Project's tech stack is not completely Web3 yet, because we have to work with clinics and vaccine administrators, and a lot of them still using paper. So when you talk to them about Web3, they just have no idea. So we have to be existing in the world where we will be able to bridge to the traditional world, but at the same time, we can also advocate for Web3, because the essence of what we do is really very aligned with Web3's spirit, right? To your point, individual data ownership, open standards, open, decentralized approach. So right now, a lot of what we do are still trying to bring Web2 world in the healthcare industry, for example, and many governments as well, when they, cross border, and they're just, we're still talking about using piece of paper to fill into, there's no web, right? So bridging all this world together, and then advocate this kind of decentralized and, using tech stack to build trust, and therefore we might not immediately get to individual data ownership for people, but we will be able to get to individual will be freely access to their data, and also health data portability, and also this data interoperability globally, right? So I think the global pandemic actually offer a great opportunity to really promote this kind of individuals' rights to be able to carry their vaccine records everywhere and be able to recognize and verify it.
Yeah, they talk about the pandemic, I suppose, as speeding up like the changes that were coming anyway, and kind of that we're now 3 or 5 years ahead in terms of how the kind of, I suppose, the global technological kind of situation with people home working now, and the level of connection that's going on online, which didn't really exist before this, but we're still kind of struggling to catch up and be like, how what are the rules now, and do you see Web3 as being kind of the solution to some of those problems? It seems like that's kind of where it's going, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, those of us who were, getting into the whole blockchain world, bought into this kind of decentralized approach to the new web, would know that in the early days, there were a lot of, seems like blockchain was the technology and technical philosophy exist, but it was really difficult to find a problem to really solve, right? So many people argue that it's been a solution that's looking for problem. But here we are, we actually have a global crisis in front of us, and which Web3 tech stack and approaches can really help to solve the problem. The question is, are there enough political will? Is there enough kind of combination of this kind of political skill, be able to operate between very complex stakeholders, but at the same time have this very open mind of not only just advocate for Web3, but you also make room for a lot of Web2 or even non-digital players to be part of the ecosystem. So, having this combination is really the trick.
And in terms of blockchain there, I mean, is a part of what you're advocating for the data to be stored on the blockchain as well, like in a global sense, that like for governments, it would have to transcend an individual government, and that you would have kind of a global blockchain that's interoperable for everyone. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I don't know if that's any good, but yeah.
So right now we are, we're not really using blockchain, right? Because, at the moment, we have to consider the scalability consideration, but also in terms of bringing all these different stakeholders from, individual, healthcare providers, tech companies, and also governments, etc. It's not, I think the entire ecosystem is not ready yet, but at some point, might become very useful, right? So what we are trying to do is we need to focus on the problem and be tech agnostic. With the clear view that Web3 approach clearly can play a very big role in what we do. So that's the direction we want to head more.
And just reflecting, I suppose, on the last 2 years or so of the pandemic, if you could, I suppose, go back, and if there was Web3 tech that we have now, or the way it is at the moment, do you see any problems that have gone on with the pandemic, with the way, I suppose, it unfolded or was handled? How do you think Web3 tech could have made that easier? I don't know if there's any examples that pop up, but...
So I think, a tech problem is never only exist in isolation as only a tech problem, right? Often it's combined with a governance problem or a political problem. So one example is, the entire world, especially this, I think, conspiracy theory community, right? The moment they hear, forget about anti-vacciners, right? But for people who are very skeptical about this term, that vaccine passport, I totally understand where the concern comes from, right? But people were unable to break that down and say, okay, this is a horrible term, and nobody wants to end up have to carry a pass to be able to use your vaccine record to go where you're going. In some countries, this is already happening, right? But the reality is that if you actually, think Web3, think enabling individuals' data ownership, if we do it properly, if it was conducted by the right kind of independent, neutral, nonprofit organization, this actually could become the perfect Trojan horse for individuals to carry their personal data with them. Because starting with vaccination data, that individual have to be, carrying them to cross-border anyway and be verified. But the next thing is, you can expand that health data, right, from immunization to other types of health data. And then what could become possible is actually if individual is the center point of all this health data, and if I get sick in country A, and I have to travel to country B, and I need to seek some medical, assistance in country B, I don't have to be re-diagnosed again, right? I could just use whatever, it's in my wallet already. So this is actually giving people a lot more freedom rather than taking away, right? So I think the reason why your conference, conference like yours is so important is because a lot of people have not really seen the true potential. If we truly apply Web3 approach, can, use individual as the center point, and building technology not for the shareholders of big tech or not for the government, then we actually will significantly enable individuals, not taking away the freedom.
Yeah, and that's a big change in attitude maybe since the start of tech, since Web 1 going through Web 2, and that people have kind of reflected on what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and that Web 3 really seems to take into account a lot of those difficulties, which is why it's going to be so interesting to see people talk about it at the conference, because it's all people from totally different areas, totally different walks of life, coming at from different angles. So it's going to be... really bringing together of those different kind of ideas. And what is it that you're speaking about, Jen? I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe to give people a taste of what they're going to see.
So I will be speaking about how not to waste a perfect crisis. And, while the world is suffering this, terrible global pandemic, what kind of solution that we can put into the place that enable individual, empower individual, but at the same time also be able to safely reopen the world. And if we can do that right, and also putting a kind of digital infrastructure in place that does not belong to any big tech company or any government, and it's neutral, putting people in the center, then we will have not wasted this crisis, right? And instead, we're putting a positive legacy, because the pandemic is already here. We might as well do something meaningful with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is probably the most meaningful thing I can think of in terms of for the 21st century, that kind of revolution. So I'm excited for the talk. Thank you very much for your time, Jen, and we'll see you at the conference.
Thank you so much, man. I can't wait.
Thank you.